Welcome to Truth, Money, and Freedom, where we discuss everything about truth, money, and freedom with your hosts, Timmy Chonga and Dell, coming to you from our Discord server, also named Truth, Money, and Freedom. An invite to our Discord platform is linked below in the description for anyone to join in on the conversation. In today's show, we'll be discussing Bitcoin with our special guest, the Four Satoshis, who has studied almost all aspects of Bitcoin and its blockchain. The Four Satoshis is a sought-after guest on many YouTube platforms for his knowledge and perspective on all things Bitcoin. The Four Satoshis has a Twitter account, also called The Four Satoshis, where he can be reached and where you can find out more about Bitcoin, which is also listed below in the description. Thank you for joining us tonight, Four Satoshis. Can you let us know a little bit more about yourself and how you got involved in Bitcoin?
Sure thing. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun here tonight. I love talking to people about Bitcoin, and hopefully somebody's going to learn a little something about Bitcoin here tonight. So that's always a good thing. But I myself, I got into computers actually in the early 1980s. I think it was 1981. I got my first computer, and I was self-taught a bunch of programming languages. I also took some programming languages in college. And I was also very interested in networking. And all this experience, I think, helped me understand Bitcoin a little bit better, having that prerequisite of all that other computer information. But then I heard about Bitcoin for the first time, like you probably hear a lot of people talk about when they heard about Bitcoin the first time. It was the summer of 2009, which was about 6 months after the whole network started in January of 2009. But I heard about it and blew it off as a scam. It just seemed ridiculous. It was a brand new thing that, not that easy to understand. And in my earlier years of life experience, I was exposed to lots of different kind of scams. There was chain letters were quite popular at one point when I was a teenager, and multiple different other pyramid schemes and stuff. And I just figured it was something like that. And so I basically blew it off until 4 years later, I saw it on the news. They were talking about it, that it was still, alive and running. And I thought, wow, that was 4 years ago I first heard about it. And if it was some kind of scam, it would have been shut down, busted by now. Maybe there is something to this. So that's when I started really studying it in the summer of 2013. And by January 14, I started mining, and I experimented with lots of different hardware miners for over a year. It was second quarter 2015 when I bought my first Bitcoin. I think it was just under $300 on its way down to 200. And then, of course, for there, it was a 3-year bull run up to 20,000. And so, yeah, I was selling everything out of my garage I hadn't used in about a year to get cash for it to buy Bitcoin. And then I also, in 2016, I started a user group where we met once a month for 19 months to discuss Bitcoin. And I also ran kind of a little service on the side, helping people with consultations and coin splitting. And then here we are today.
It's funny you mentioned that with the Bitcoin mining, because there's so many people that became millionaires from Bitcoin mining in the early days just by holding that Bitcoin. And of course, there's the famous story about the 10,000 Bitcoin for a couple of pizzas. I bet you that guy who sold or gave his Bitcoin for pizzas is deeply regretting that now.
Yes, that was the first known purchase of Bitcoin. I mean, I'm sure there were other ones, but it was the first publicized purchase. And he was a guy who was hungry and didn't have any cash to buy food, and put a message on a message board. And this was May 22nd of 2010. And he lived in Florida, and the guy answered this message, lived in England, and called the States, and using his credit card had 2 pizzas delivered to his residence. And the guy lived up to his message and sent the guy 10,000 Bitcoins. So if you do the math there, for having 2 pizzas delivered was about $25. And that would set the price of 4 Bitcoins equaling 1 penny. And of course, today it's $8,400.
Yes, it is. By the way, I forgot to mention the date at the beginning of this interview, so I'd like to get that out of the way. It's
Sure.
October 23rd, 2018, by the way. That way it's on the record. And I know we talked just a tad bit about, Bitcoin mining and everything, but what I'd like to bring in relation to that is about the blockchain itself. Could you briefly explain what the blockchain tech is and why it's a revolutionary development? Because we hear that word, it's a buzzword now. So can you kind of let us know what the blockchain technology is?
I can try to explain that. Briefly explain it is a little difficult.
It is complex, but we'll try and make it
Yes.
as we can. But that's the fundamental basis of Bitcoin, isn't it? It's the blockchain it rides on.
It's the technology that made it possible, yes.
Yep. Okay.
And simply put, blockchain is a decentralized immutable ledger of transactions. It is a number of blocks that are cryptographically secured, and each block is cryptographically linked to the block before it. Hence, it is a chain of blocks or a blockchain. But this technology really only applies to Bitcoin. It's very specific. The way that it works and the role that it plays in Bitcoin makes it really only good for Bitcoin. I mean, I hear about so many projects out there that, we're going to put land rights on the blockchain. We're going to put medical records on the blockchain. We're going to put oranges on the blockchain, to track where your orange was grown and what pesticides were used and who shipped it and who stored it and how it got to the grocer, right? All those things are really good to know, and you could easily store this information in a centralized database, and that is open to the public for, to search. You don't want to use a blockchain for that. I've been working on an analogy lately. I thought this up last week, as a matter of fact, and I equate Bitcoin to aviation. And for hundreds of years, powered manned flight was never accomplished, right? So many people tried to do it for so many hundreds of years. Really bright people attempted it. They all failed, and it kind of became general knowledge of the world that human-controlled powered flight was impossible. But a few people still strived for it, and of course, the Wright brothers were the first to actually do it. But what allowed them to do it was a revolutionary technology called the wing. Their wing design is what made flight possible. And that they even built these wind tunnels, these little boxes that they had fans on either side blowing air through it, and made little models of wings and put it through into this, in the middle of this wind tunnel, through a little slot connected to a rod, and then would turn the fans on, move the air through there. And the higher that little rod rose in the box, the more lift the wing had. And they kept playing with different designs to get the most lift possible. And then they built their craft full size and actually flew. But this wing technology, how it's flat on the bottom and then curved on the top and tapers down to a point in the back, that creates, as that moves through the air going across the bottom of the wing is a shorter distance than the air going up and over the wing. That creates the air on the top of the wing to spread out or create a vacuum, which allows the air below the wing to push the wing up into that vacuum. And that was the key technology that made powered, controlled human flight possible. But where else do we use this technology, right? Essential to aviation, that technology is. We don't use it anywhere else, right? We don't put big, huge, giant wings on pencils. We don't put big, huge, giant wings on coffee cups. We don't put big, huge, giant wings on underwear, right? It's only good in aviation is this big, huge, giant wing. It's really, really great, really, really special as far as aviation goes, but it's not good anywhere else. This is blockchain. It's really, really good technology for Bitcoin. It's not good for anywhere else.
Well, can we go briefly into consensus nodes and consensus? Because I think that should be discussed or at least mentioned, because that's part of the revolutionary development where you have a distributed ledger and it cannot be altered. And I think that's worth mentioning. It's important as well. Go ahead.
Well, there's different consensus things in Bitcoin. Everyone comes to consensus that these transactions are finalized once they're in the
Correct.
blockchain, right?
Right.
But there's also the consensus rules, like the rules of what a block could be, like for example, the block size and the difficulty and all this stuff. There's sets of rules, and so for these rules to be changed, you need consensus. Now, these different, I think I might be going into a future question here, but these different Bitcoin forks, they thought there should be changes in these rules that would make it somehow better. And so they took the code and created their own chain and just started up on their own. So with, their own rules, and, they're just projects that really don't have anywhere near the support that Bitcoin has for this or that reason.
Yep, but the blockchain itself maintains a copy of all those transactions till the end of time. It's always there. It can always be looked up. So that's neat as well. Certainly when you're talking about something that's being used as a currency. So I thought that would be important to go ahead and mention that part as well.
Yeah, and that was when I first started talking about this, and I said it was a decentralized, immutable ledger of transactions. So that's, yeah, I mean, yeah, we could go into more detail about immutable and how it is and how is it cryptographically secured. I can explain these things, but
yeah, I know that actually that would be a 4-hour deal. But well, since we've actually talked about blockchain in general, can we go into a more generalized version of Bitcoin, the fundamentals of Bitcoin, and why Bitcoin is superior to other cryptocurrencies? Basically, the Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. There are other cryptocurrencies out there. Why Bitcoin?
Yeah, there's over 2,000 listed on CoinMarketCap, which please don't use CoinMarketCap to rate coins. That's a terrible way to rate a coin, and we can go into that later. But this whole idea of copying the Bitcoin code, making a couple changes and putting it back out there, and now you have a similar product or a similar currency. We've been brainwashed over the years, or we've been taught or learned over the years that computers are really good at copying things. You can have a picture and I can send you a copy. I can email you a copy. I can put a copy on Facebook and have millions of people all around the world looking at this one picture, millions of copies of it that get downloaded to their computer just by a click. And that picture is just as good and has just the same value as the original picture, just by copying the code, just by copying that information. Where Bitcoin shines is its total network effect. What you need to have a good, stable, reliable coin is you need to have much more than just the code. The code's important, but you need to have more than the code. You need to have the best developers developing it, making changes, adding features, finding bugs, these kind of things. And you want to have the most nodes running the code. The node is nothing but a computer that's running the program Bitcoin, right? And that's what's keeping track of the ledger. It's storing the blockchain on these nodes. And then you have the miners that, mine the transactions into the block. And so that's very important. So the amount and quality of the devs, the amount of the nodes, the sheer hash power of all the miners in Bitcoins, these things are very hard to duplicate. It's so easy to duplicate the code, but this total network effect, extremely hard to duplicate that.
Understood. Basically, and I'm going to lead into hard forks here in a second, but Bitcoin was designed to be a currency. Bitcoin was designed to be a store of value as well. And therefore, Bitcoin is often referred to as the gold standard of cryptocurrencies. And I was going to ask for your opinion on people saying that. What are your feelings on that?
Well, there's a book called The Bitcoin Standard by a guy named Saifedean. I can't think of his last name at the moment. I highly recommend that book. But Bitcoin was designed to be a currency. It was designed to be the most sound currency the most sound currency ever created by man. And it was designed to be mined or created for that process of the currency was designed to mimic gold. So that was kind of the relationship of how it's kind of like gold, but kind of like a currency. I mean, because maybe gold hundreds of years ago was used as a currency, but certainly not anymore. It's more of a store of value. Not a very good one in recent years or even decades, but it's still better than holding on to the USD for a long period of time.
Absolutely. Way better than that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the way I bring that up, because that's kind of the way I think of Bitcoin that way too, because as a store of value, if you bought Bitcoin 9 years ago, we talked about the pizza incident where it was, 4 pennies per, Satoshi or something like that.
No. It was 4 Bitcoins per penny.
Oh, that's what it was. I'm sorry. But look at it now, $6,400, $6,500. And I know it's been in a bear market, but that's one hell of a store of value. So I don't think anyone can argue that, because many might come in and say, well, that's insane, TC, because Bitcoin was $20,000 back in January. But those who are actually watching it over time see that since its inception, it has not only kept its value, but it's gone up in value as well. And if you watch it over the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, you'll see it go back up to 20 again, and probably fly far past that. But I don't know if looking at the dollar value of Bitcoin is necessarily a good way to judge it. But I'm sorry, let me go ahead and lead into the Bitcoin hard forks. We know there's been many of them. If the first one that we know of, at least that I know of, was Litecoin, and that was technically a hard fork. But there's been many others. In fact, I've heard or read at some point that Feathercoin was also a hard fork of Bitcoin. But then you have the Bitcoin of the Bitcoin forks, like Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin Private, Bitcoin, underwear, whatever. So if you could explain what hard forks are and why, and then also after that, why have there been so many of them off of Bitcoin?
Well, because it's a free and open source project, so anyone in the world is perfectly, allowed to do whatever they want with the code. It's encouraged to do whatever you want with the code. It's to experiment with and hopefully make it better. And anything that turns out to be better could be implemented into Bitcoin. But this word fork or hard fork, it has quite a bit of history. This goes. These terms go back far beyond Bitcoin ever started. It goes back to the original GitHubs or JitHubs, I've heard it pronounced both ways, where a lot of these open source projects like to gather around the GitHub website. And like if you were just doing any project, say you wanted to make your own bookkeeping software for a small business, but that's quite an undertaking, right? So you get a few of your computer buddies together to start this project. You put it up on a GitHub. You make it open source. Anybody can download it, modify it, suggest changes, and make this thing better. And as more people contribute to this, it gets better and better. And then, but some people will contribute something, and it doesn't get implemented into the next version or at all. So they might get perturbed and say, well, I don't know why these guys aren't doing what I think's better. I'm going to fork that project and start my own GitHub called Bookkeeping Four Satoshis GitHub and start my own. So I just forked that project, and this has been going on for decades, way before Bitcoin. And so you could fork a project or you could fork the coin. Now, Litecoin, you said it was a fork of Bitcoin, but it was a fork of Bitcoin
of the code. I believe it was just the code.
Yeah, the software. But you could also fork the chain, right? So coins like BGold and Bcash, they not only fork the software, they fork the chain, which means they created coins out of thin air.
Mm-hmm.
Because every single Bitcoin was not created out of thin air. It took a lot of work to create those coins. They had to be mined. You had to set a computer up to run day and night and burn a bunch of electricity, and that's a cost. They were not created out of thin air. Dollar bills are created out of thin air, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not Bitcoin. So when you fork the chain in the way some of these B coins did, they're creating coins out of thin air. A duplicate of all the coins in existence at that time of the fork get recreated onto their chain with zero work inputted. That's creating money out of thin air. Those are money grabs, in my opinion.
Okay, so basically, for instance, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Gold, when they actually created those, and they were referred to as hard forks, and we could go into soft forks, but we probably won't tonight. But basically, that was literally just someone literally trying to make money off of the name Bitcoin, creating their own version of Bitcoin that literally would generate an enormous amount of wealth for the person who created the fork instantaneously. Pretty much, is that correct?
And anybody who was holding Bitcoins at the time, they got a duplicate amount of those coins on the new chain. Those coins were basically created out of thin air. And also there was one other aspect behind the Bcash fork. The main reason why I believe that Bcash was created is because Jihan Wu, the CEO of Bitmain, who had a massive, probably the biggest mining pool at the time of the fork, he, for about the past year or more, he was mining with what's called covert ASIC boost. Nobody knew he was doing it. And this method of mining doesn't allow you to mine faster, but it allows you to use quite a bit less electricity. So basically what that thing did was give him a 20 to 30% reduction off his electric bill. So this gave him this advantage. I mean, not only were they the biggest manufacturer of mining hardware, and they could always mine with the next model that's even more efficient. They always mine with that for several months, probably 6 months to a year before they ever put them up on sale to the general public, right? So they always had that advantage. But they had this other second advantage that nobody knew about until Gregory Maxwell reverse engineered one of their chips and found out that they were doing it. Or at least they had the ability to do it. It's still hard to prove that they were actually doing it, but I'm pretty sure they were actually doing it. And this is the reason why they wanted Bitcoin Cash without SegWit, which was, at first, without knowing this information, was just mind-boggling to me, because SegWit was like the best update to Bitcoin since Bitcoin started. Why would anyone not want SegWit? It's just awesome technology. And this is the answer to that question, is they didn't want SegWit because it broke their ASIC boost. SegWit reorganized the block structure of a block, which would break their covert ASIC boost.
But it allowed them to mine I'm sorry. I was going to say it allowed them to continue mining Bitcoin Cash with the same ASIC hardware that was currently mining Bitcoin. Is that correct?
Yes, it allowed them to continue to use this little 20 to 30% coupon off their electric bill. Yes.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And that's why I think that was the main motivation behind the scenes for the reason of creating Bcash. And then there's the other things too about, just creating money out of thin air, and everybody who had a lot of Bitcoin at the time benefited from that. But, that's not the definition of sound money. That's fiat money, printing money out of thin air.
Yep, it sure is. In fact, that's a great use case for that, and it is the definition of printing money out of thin air for sure.
And so now, just to recap a little bit, now Litecoin is not that. Litecoin copied the code and started a brand new blockchain from scratch, from the block 0 or the Genesis block. They have their own Genesis block and their own blocks, since then. So that is a fair way to start a new coin. That's completely different than what the Bcash, the Bgold, the Bdiamond, the Super Bitcoin, all those other B coins did.
Gotcha. Okay. If you don't mind, if we could move into developmental arenas for Bitcoin, I'd like to ask you, before we get into some of the more interesting stuff that people may find out with use cases with Bitcoin. I would like to ask you, because we've talked about fundamentals and we've talked about the blockchain, but I was curious if you could tell us how Bitcoin is preparing for the future. What developmental steps for future proofing Bitcoin are currently being planned or implemented at this time?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is going to be fun. In fact, this is where I wanted to interact with the people listening live here. About how many people do we have in the chat? Is this number known?
Let's see. Let's say about 12 people. 12 people live listening right now.
Okay, great. And we have somebody that can see the chat and can see them type in an answer.
Yes.
Okay, so if everybody in the chat would please refrain from chatting for a moment and get ready to type in a number. I want you to type in a number between 0 and 999. So basically a 3-digit whole number, greater than 0 and less than 1,000 will be the answer to this question. Here's the question. What is the current block size maximum that the Bitcoin nodes will accept today? So basically, what is the block size limit right now today?
And
everybody
Del, if you could add those up for us. Anyone who's, I think we've got
just roughly kind of see what the people are typing in. It doesn't have to be exact. If you don't know the answer, guess. I just want to know what you think it might possibly could be.
Okay, numbers are coming in now.
Okay, so can Del talk?
Yep, Del, Del, my co-host, could you come on real quick for us?
Oh, TC.
Hey there, Del.
Hey, Del, what are we seeing here? Is there tend to be a more popular number, or are they all over the place, or what are we seeing?
They're a bit all over the place. I mean, I've had a little guess. I'll be perfectly honest. I think most people have been having a guess as well. We've got a high of 682.
682 megs?
It doesn't say. We've just been putting numbers in.
Okay, these numbers should be, I'm sorry, I didn't probably make this clear, but this block size number should be inputted in megabytes. So if you put 1, that means you think that the maximum block size is 1 megabyte.
Okay, well, maybe we should try this again now that we've kind of understand it a little better.
Okay.
Should we give it another shot, guys? If anybody knows or thinks they know or would like to have a guess.
Just a fun little exercise for the live listeners right now. They're currently typing in the chat live numbers, and we'll hopefully get some numbers here for Four
Satoshis. I'm getting a phone call here. Satoshi Nakamoto is calling me, wanting to give me his answer.
Satoshi's calling you right now in the middle of our interview.
Yes.
Oh boy, I feel like we've been upstaged.
Privileges.
Yes, he does.
Yes, very special privileges for him.
Have you upset him by giving out secret information here?
Okay, so what are we seeing this time? Are we seeing pretty much the same numbers, or are they looking different?
They're looking a little different. We've got a 1, a 2, as in 1 meg and 2 meg.
Uh-huh.
I've got 512.
Okay.
We've got Victor at 500, Gray at 682.
Wow.
So, yes, I think it would be fair to say that most, if not all of us, don't know.
And what did you think it was, Del?
I went for 512.
512 megs. Okay, and Timmy, do you have a?
Yes,
guess?
I went with 2 megs.
2 megs. I don't think anyone said the correct answer. The correct answer is 4 megs.
Oh wow, gotcha. I didn't know that.
The block size before SegWit, because this is leading into your question about recent improvements and soon to come improvements, right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
the biggest update to Bitcoin was the SegWit, and SegWit is just so freaking awesome. It's unbelievable. Before SegWit, it was impossible to do a block size increase without a hard fork. The geniuses in the core developers figured out a way to do it with a soft fork, which is, it's just wow. As you can see, I'm at a loss for words here. It's just incredible.
How many transactions can you fit in a block? And I know that's kind of a weird question to ask, but I'm just curious. Do you know?
Well, different transactions are different sizes. So if you
Right.
kind of go by an average size transaction and fill a block with average size transactions, you would, before SegWit, it would be about 2,200 transactions. Before SegWit, the block size was 1 meg. And then with SegWit, it changed to 4 megs, but you cannot really make a 4 meg block at this time. But the question that I originally asked was, what was the maximum block size that's allowed by the network right now? So that means before SegWit, if you were to create a block that was 1.1 meg, the nodes would reject that block. It was over the maximum. Today, if you could create a block that was 3.8, 3.9, 4 megs, the nodes would accept that block. It's a valid block up to 4 megs. Now, the maximum size right now is about 2 megs if most people were using SegWit addresses, and it's only at about 45 to 50% usage right now. So everybody who is sending at least one transaction a month or more, you should be using SegWit. SegWit addresses. It will make your transactions smaller. It will, which makes them cheaper, which means more transactions can fill in the block, which means the mempool doesn't get backed up so far, and just the whole blockchain runs much more smoothly. So you're helping yourself by having a cheaper transaction fee, and you're helping Bitcoin by fitting more transactions in a block. Use SegWit.
Okay, let me ask you a question based on what you just said, because my head's doing 360s inside of my cranium on that. The larger block sizes, how does that help us as users of Bitcoin? Does it make the transactions actually go faster because more of them fit inside the block? I mean, how does that actually work?
Well, let's see here.
I know it makes the general.
Let's say, right.
Okay, go ahead.
I could send you, let's say I wanted to send you 1 Bitcoin. I could send you 1 Bitcoin, and then I could send you 0.1 Bitcoin. Which transaction is bigger, as in a bigger transaction that fills a block, takes up more space?
1 Bitcoin.
Wrong. Transactions, transaction size is not determined by the amount or value you're sending. It is determined by how many inputs it takes to build that transaction. So let me say, if I give you $100 bill, right, in Bitcoin, that would be a small transaction because it's 1 input. It's 1 bill that I put in your hand. Now, if I gave you $100, if I give you 100 $1 bills, that's still the same value. That's $100, but that's a much bigger transaction. I'm giving you, that transaction took 100 inputs. 100 $1 bills I had to put in your hand.
Okay.
And so if my wallet received 0.01 Bitcoin, that's like a bit penny, let's call it, right? Just like 0.01 is a penny of $1. There's 100 pennies in $1. So 0.01 Bitcoin is a bit penny, and I receive 100 of those. And now now my wallet doesn't show any of this, right? It just shows I have 1 Bitcoin in my wallet because I received 100 bit pennies. Now I want to send you a Bitcoin. That's a huge transaction. That transaction is going to have 100 inputs. And that's going to take up a lot of space in that block, which takes up a lot of space in the blockchain. So does that kind of clear things up for you?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. Okay. If you don't mind, I'm going to move into the concept of double spending. We've all heard about it, especially with hard forks, and then problems with double spending.
Well,
So
we kind of
basically,
we kind of I don't know how much time we spent on this topic, but I didn't go into the future development or even more current developments in Bitcoin right now.
okay, gotcha. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No,
Okay,
I'm
so
sorry. I didn't mean to speed it up. Go ahead.
yeah, this stuff is very important here. I kind of spent too much time on SegWit, but I wanted to, kind of make things make a couple things clear, and then you asked me that question. But anyway, so another thing that, well, let me back up here. So SegWit came out in August of 2017. So that was a block size increase, and with the SegWit the way it is today, if the vast majority of transactions were using SegWit, the block size would be about 2 megs. I do see 2 meg transactions when you look at all the blocks, but they're pretty rare. But now, coming up here soon, we're going to get another update to SegWit, kind of SegWit 2.0, which is going to have a feature called Schnorr signatures. And this is going to take all the signatures in a transaction, it's going to compress them down into one signature. So when you have a transaction, and you talk about building a transaction and the size of the transaction, not only do you have to have the address of where all the inputs are coming from, you have to have a signature for all those inputs. And the signature, out of all the data in the transaction, the input address, the output address, and all the signatures, the biggest part of the transaction is the signature. It takes up the most space of a transaction. And so when you have, let's say, 100 inputs and 100 transactions, think how much space that's going to save if you could turn those 100 signatures into one signature.
Okay, I get that.
Yeah, that's the power of Schnorr signatures. And you can't take advantage of that power when it comes out. It's going to be out here soon, probably hopefully within 3 to 6 months, maybe 9. You can't take advantage of that if you're not using SegWit. So switch your wallets over to SegWit, people. So that came out in August 2017. Now, January of this year, Bitcoin got another nice little addition, the Lightning Network. And what the Lightning Network is, it's a Bitcoin network that's running on top of Bitcoin that allows you to move coins around really fast and really cheap. I've used it several times, and my transactions range from free to 13 1/1000ths of a penny transaction fee. And the transactions are virtually instant. So there's your cup of coffee, right? And I'm going to get into buying a cup of coffee later when we do talk about
Use cases.
the thing you just talked about, the double spend issue.
Double spend. Okay.
Yeah. But anybody who argues about you can't use Bitcoin, it takes too long, well, Lightning solves that problem. Done deal. Okay, it's been working. There are, it's still growing. There are still some routing issues here and there, but this is a new thing, and it getting bigger and better and stronger every single day. It's actually growing bigger and faster than anybody really imagined. So the Lightning Network is simply awesome. And as far as Litecoin goes, its whole narrative was the silver to Bitcoin's gold, being a cheaper transaction, being a faster transaction. The Litecoin network has a 2.5-minute block time instead of a 10-minute block time. Well, Lightning just destroys that. Lightning is the Litecoin killer, because Lightning is instant and a much smaller fee than even a Litecoin transaction.
Wow.
So those are out already. So now let's go into near future here. Actually, there's one more that just came out. I think it was last week or the week before. I think it was last week, called Liquid. Now, Liquid is kind of the opposite of Lightning, because Lightning tends to be geared more for small transactions, let's say transactions under $200. Liquid, it is a federated sidechain built on top of Lightning, or beside Lightning, that has a two-way peg to Bitcoin. It's built on top of Bitcoin. Sorry, and it has a two-way peg to Bitcoin, and it handles big transactions back and forth. You have to be signed up to use it. It's federated. Back and forth between exchanges or any trading desk, or anybody who wants to sign up to it can sign up to it. As long as you could prove you have this need and to send large amounts of Bitcoin around. And so It will help in like arbitraging between exchanges and other uses. And whenever you need to send a large amount of Bitcoin, and the finalization in the Liquid network is 2 minutes. So in 2 minutes, you're going to have a finalized transaction with large amounts. Lightning is for smaller amounts, and the finalization in Lightning is instant. So, and this is all working right now on Bitcoin. And so Liquid is kind of like the SWIFT.
The SWIFT system, sure,
Yeah,
for moving
for the
around
banking industry.
digital U.S. dollars. Yep.
Yeah, for the banking industry, which it kind of Ripple is trying to, do that. Well, kind of Liquid on Bitcoin is the Ripple killer, right? Like Lightning is the Litecoin killer, Liquid is the Ripple killer. I mean, why transfer things around in Ripple when you have this ultra secure coin called Bitcoin, and you could do it on a side chain to Bitcoin? Much better solution. So
Yep,
these are all things.
Now, you brought up Ripple, and I just got to say this out loud here. Ripple is not a true cryptocurrency. It never has been. It never will be. Its blockchain is hidden and closed off. You cannot look at transactions on its blockchain. Number two is the wallets under the control of the Ripple mining and development team. They can shut down your wallet. That's no good. I mean, obviously, and there's actually examples of this actually happening in the last 6 months, maybe 8 months.
Yes,
But,
all the things that give Bitcoin power, its immutability, its censorship resistance, its decentralization, it's unconfiscatable. All these features of Bitcoin are not in Ripple.
That's correct. So yeah, just make sure that everyone who's listening in understands that, since you did bring up the name Ripple.
Yes, and I would kind of disagree, because it technically is a cryptocurrency. It's just not an immutable, censorship resistant, decentralized, unconfiscatable cryptocurrency.
It's a severely diminished cryptocurrency. Let's just say that.
Severely crippled, yes. Crippled, rippled. Okay, so now those are all out. Lightning, SegWit, and Liquid. Now, the next one that I think will probably come about for Bitcoin is an update called MAST, Merkleized Abstract Syntax Trees. And, to explain that, we're going to need a lot longer show.
Can you come up with a brief synopsis for it?
Well, to tell the truth, a lot of it I don't even understand.
Okay, gotcha.
MAST is a bit above my pay grade, but I can tell you what it's going to do. It's going to help make transactions even smaller. It's going to give Bitcoin a bit more privacy, and it's going to help make larger smart contracts, because Bitcoin actually has smart contracts, right? The transfer of Bitcoin in itself, me sending Bitcoin to you, at its base level is a contract, right?
Yes, it is.
And there are features of contracts even now in Bitcoin. There's a feature that most wallets don't have in the GUI, but you can get in the CLI, the command line interface, which most people don't use. But there's a feature called check lock time verify. So I could send you Bitcoin, or let's say you were having a baby, you and your wife are having a baby, and I'm going to the baby shower, and I want to give that baby $20 worth of Bitcoin, and I want to lock it in that address for 18 years. Mm-hmm. So when this baby becomes 18 years old and ready to go to college, we'll have this lump sum of Bitcoin available to him or her. I mean, what's $20 worth of Bitcoin going to be worth in 18 years?
Yeah, exactly. It's like giving, a gold coin, it's kind of got the same feel to it. That store of value is there.
Right. I mean, look at what Bitcoin has done the past 8 years, or let's see, the past 9 years, look what Bitcoin has done, and then kind of double that. I mean, just for a basis. Of course, it doesn't have to do exactly what it did the past 8 years or 9 years. But that there's a lot of power in that. But once again, MAST, Merkleized Abstract Syntax Trees, will help with those things. And then, like I already mentioned, we will be getting, probably after that, we'll be getting SegWit 2.0 with the Schnorr signatures. Then after that, we could be getting an update called Dandelion. How does Dandelion work? Well, how it works now without Dandelion is, let's say you're at your home and you want to send some Bitcoin. You have to broadcast that transaction from your wallet to typically it goes to the nearest node, and that node will validate that transaction. And if it finds it valid, it will then propagate that transaction to 6 or 7 other nodes it's connected to. Each one of those nodes will validate that transaction and then propagate it to 6 or 7 more nodes. Each one of those nodes would go to 6 or 7 more nodes. So it kind of blossoms or flowers out from there like a dandelion with all the little white little floaty things on it when it blossoms. Mm-hmm. So as you send multiple transactions, if somebody knows that you're sending them, they can see that those nearest nodes that you're connecting to when you send, and geographically kind of triangulate, get a good idea of where you are in the world. Kind of identifies you in a way in a bit. Mm-hmm. So what Dandelion does is sets a counter. When you broadcast your transaction using Dandelion, you get like a counter of 5, and it goes to the first node nearest you. From there, that node changes that 5 to a 4 and randomly selects a node somewhere in the world and sends it there. That node changes the 4 to a 3 and randomly selects a node somewhere in the world and sends it there, and so on and so forth until it gets down to 0. Then that node validates the transaction and starts propagating it from that location. So it flowers from there. So now your transactions will flower from different locations all around the world, and making it much harder to pinpoint your location. Much better for privacy.
Absolutely. Wow, I didn't know about that.
Yes, Dandelion. Watch for it soon.
When is that planned for Bitcoin?
Things like this are not really planned. They are researched, they are tested thoroughly and retested and looked at again for bugs and retested more, and then gone onto a test network, a private test network and a public test network. And then when they're all said and done with all the testing, it gets into the code, and then it's available in the next release. So Bitcoin is not a business, and so they don't really have these time, set for these time factors that they could really give good guesstimations of when things like this are going to be released. They don't want to rush anything. They don't want any more bugs found, like the bug last month. Of course, that was a very specific bug that nobody knew was there. They had it fixed before anybody knew it was there. And you had to be a miner with substantial amount of hash power to even implement that bug. And if you had that, millions of dollars worth of infrastructure to mine Bitcoin, would you really want to try to expose a flaw in Bitcoin that would, could possibly, bring the price down when you've bought all this equipment to mine it and store your value? If you were a miner and found this bug, you'd probably just contact the core developers and let them know about it, right? So the guy who found this was a Bitcoin Unlimited developer, and he did the right thing. He contacted core and notified them, and they fixed it and then released all the information.